Hello, everybody. Welcome to Good Tech, an ongoing discussion around ethics in technology. I'm Elizabeth Perry with Idka. I want to remind you that we'll be taking calls during the show. So if you have any questions or comments, please dial the number on your screen and we'll be happy to have you join in the discussion. Today, we're going to talk about kids and the digital age. Was the digital world made for them? Was it designed with them in mind? As children spend more and more time online, what are their rights and what are we doing to protect them? Joining me to tackle these questions and more is someone whose work centers around children's rights. It's a great pleasure to introduce to you Manager of Corporate Responsibility at UNICEF Finland, Irene Leino. Welcome, Irene. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation.
Oh, you're quite welcome. The pleasure is all mine. So let's start with your journey. It's been an interesting one. Tell us how your work has evolved over the years. How did you get to today?
Sure. So, well, let me start by saying that I'm actually not a technical person, as I know that probably a lot of the listeners are. I have an MBA and I've focused all my career on social impacts of companies from very different points of views. So I worked for the government, I worked for the UN and the World Bank, and I've also ran business myself. And I have lived in a big number of countries around the world in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America. But for the last 5.5 years, I worked at UNICEF in Finland, helping companies to become more sustainable and consider children's rights in their own operations. And while this work started originally more from the sort of supply chain point of view, over the last years, I've started increasingly engaging with the ICT sector and working with companies that are offering different types of products and services to children online.
Yeah, so you and I talked quite a bit about the difference between the physical world and the digital one. And well, first, before I want to say that, I want to say your tagline, for every child, talk about children. Why the emphasis on children?
Well, even though people may not realize it, but 1/3 of all the internet users globally are children. And when I talk about children, I mean all kids under 18 years old. And according to the most recent study made here in Finland, 97% of kids between the ages of 9 and 17 have smartphones, and they are online pretty much constantly. And this figure is pretty similar to a lot of other countries. So overall, kids are some of the most active users of especially social media, games, apps, videos, and so on. And in addition to having the same rights than all other people, kids should have more protection because of their vulnerability, because of their age and developmental stage. And at the same time, the internet overall and all the different services there are not designed from the perspective of children and their rights. And there are not really any safeguards in place.
Yeah, so then now we're talking about the difference between the digital world and the physical one. We have human rights and we have a UN, but we don't have a UN for our digital world. So what's the difference? How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, of course, I mean, we can't really sort of put online and offline world totally apart either, because I think both of them, I mean, digital world is integral part of our lives and many things appear in both, but maybe the rules are a little bit different because we have a lot of rules and regulations in place in the offline world regarding age limits to various products or ethical marketing practices or other different types of safeguards for children. But sometimes it seems that what now we call here the digital world, all these sort of digital services and the internet overall, it's a bit like Wild West, and there don't seem to be that many rules, or at least the rules are not enforced. And I know that the global nature makes it much harder to set and enforce those rules. But then on the other hand, come on, we live in the 21st century, globalization and even the digital era have been here for a while. So perhaps it's time to rethink what kinds of rules we should have also for those services.
Mm, yeah. And what about the difference between, how do you distinguish between adults and children in the online world?
Well, currently the situation is that most of the service providers really don't distinguish them. There might be some half-hearted attempts to do so by asking users for their age, but why I said half-hearted is because it is very easy to choose whatever age the user wants to. So my question more is that should we somehow distinguish them? Because if we don't, and the current practices continue, children's data is collected, stored, and sold exactly the same way than adults without any special protections being in place. And are we cool with that?
Hmm. Yeah. So what are the biggest problems that you're seeing in your work that you're trying to solve at UNICEF?
Well, I mean, overall, UNICEF is obviously working on multiple different issues, but if we focus more on the digital world and in particular on data collection and privacy issues, because there's naturally lots of other issues related to the digital world as well. But if I focus on those, I would like to point out the following. Well, as we all know that terms and conditions are not designed for any of us users. They are designed by lawyers, to other lawyers, but definitely not designed for kids. And even if kids were able to understand them, often the services have only two options. Either you take it all as it is or you leave it. So therefore, kids even theoretically couldn't decide which data they want to share and where it goes if they want to use any given service that all their friends are using. So, and also the reality is that none of us really know who has access to our data and how it's used. And of course, the data is used for many great things. I mean, there are a lot of innovations out there. There's a lot of things that help people that have been created because there's been this data available from us. But at the same time, kids don't know if their data is being used for something great or something that might be turned against them at some point during their lives. And the awareness of profiling and behavior manipulation is slowly building. And there's a lot of talk about currently in the society how data is the new oil or the new electricity. And but what if our data is going to be used in the future for making decisions on our behalf for such issues that who gets to access certain school, or at what price you get your health insurance or any other insurance, or what kinds of jobs you can get in the future based on your profile. So that's why I want to always emphasize that I think there should be definitely protections in place for kids, and data collected from minors should never be used in any harmful way against them.
Mm, yeah. And so what are some of the dangers you talked about, being accepted to school or insurance, not giving you, if you have a pre-existing condition maybe, or what are some of the other dangers that the kids and parents and adults should know about?
I mean, overall, just understanding kind of how our data is being used and how perhaps that is being used so that it affects our own behavior as well. We people don't always understand how easily we are to be manipulated if somebody wants so, let alone kids being able to understand that, and understanding the sort of broader societal uh, uh, things around them.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about data being collected, we've talked on this show a lot about social media, and I know you probably don't want to point fingers too much, but um, we talk mostly about social media. What else are you saying? And then are you saying kids should not be able to use social media, or that these companies shouldn't be able to collect data at all, like you said?
Well, social media is definitely something that a lot of kids use a lot. In addition to that, though, they play games and use all different kinds of apps and use search engines and so on. So there's lots of different other types of services they use as well that collect data from them. But regarding the social media, I mean, of course, like part of the data that is collected from kids is something that they have shared themselves, by posting something about themselves or sharing pictures and so on. But a lot of it there and elsewhere is collected from children without them actually really realizing that every click, every like, everything they do is collected and stored. But then when we talk about, I don't want to talk about actually forbidding kids from using these things, because kids should have the same right to social life, friendships, finding information online, leisure time, and so on as adults. So that's why I don't think that restricting the access to these services should be the solution. However, I think that these services should be such that they are safe for kids to use. And whether the solution is that their practices are changed, towards all the users overall, in case kids are not recognized online, or somehow minors are recognized online, and there are different rules about collecting and selling their data. Sometimes companies have approached this by designing separate services for kids. There's all kinds of, from the same app or from the same social media platform, there's like a separate one for kids. And while this might work for younger kids, although there are also some problems regarding those as well, this certainly doesn't work for, let's say 13 to 17-year-old kids, because they don't want to use the kids' apps. They want to be like adults.
Mm-hmm. So they're using they're using the same services. And let's talk about that a little bit. You know, we talk about corporate responsibility, and these companies are saying that no, we don't allow 13 kids under 13 to use our services. Um, but clearly they are. And what is, let's talk more about the corporation's responsibility, in your opinion.
Yeah, well, let me start by emphasizing that when I talk about children, I don't only talk about those under 13, but I talk about everyone under 18, because all of them are in our society, they are considered as children, as minors. So 13 is this one age, and it's partly like maybe perhaps even randomly selected by COPPA and in some other countries as well. But it doesn't mean that is now carved on stone, that this is exactly the age for everything. And at least I'm based here in Europe, so I know GDPR much more than COPPA, but the age limit there, whether it's set between 13 to 16 and countries can choose themselves, it's an age limit for giving consent for your own data processing. Whether the consent is provided by a parent or by a teen, him or herself, doesn't change the fact that we are still talking about children who should be kept protected, and giving the consent for processing data. But if you don't understand what you're giving the consent to, like, and what are the implications of it, is it truly giving a proper consent to something?
Right. I mean, I don't even know what I'm consenting to when I look at things. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a kid, so I don't know how the kids, I just don't understand how they can get it. And I'm sure 99.9% of them don't even read anything. They just sort of click
E-
on yes
e-
because they want to go ahead and do their game or whatever.
Exactly. But I just realized maybe I didn't answer your question fully because I got, just talking about sort of the age that, how do we define kids and what is the definition, what is the age? But also when you asked about the corporate responsibility in these cases, that should they check, should they know if they have, kids as their customers? And as I mentioned earlier, that this I referred to this half-hearted attempt, because some services like social media ask for your age when you register, but this is just sort of a bit of like an act, because you can choose any age you like. If I want to register, I can choose that I'm 60 years old if I want to.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, based on the user's behavior, social media companies have been said to know more about us than sometimes our own spouses. So obviously, I'm sure that they would know which of their users are minors and which not, based on the behavior, even if the age is not put correctly. And not all services even ask this. I mean, this is like for those services where you register for. But then there's all these services, online, like, you can watch YouTube videos, or you can use search engines, you can download apps and games and whatnot. And they don't ask the data, but yet they process data. They don't ask the age, but they process the data from the user as well. So I think it's just a question of priorities. Companies have a lot of due diligence processes on many issues as part of their operations. They might have some related to product safety or good governance and so on. So I think all companies that offer services online, whether they target those services to kids or not, should do their proper due diligence to find out whether in reality kids are using their services, and what they could do to provide enough protections for those kids who are their users.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk about some news. This is very appropriate. There was an article that came out today in Gizmodo talking about Facebook, and here's the first paragraph. It shouldn't come as a surprise that whatever you do on Facebook eventually comes back to you in the form of targeted ads. Then highlighted, it turns out, however, that Facebook's advertising tools have also marked hundreds of thousands of children as interested in gambling and alcohol, opening them up to some not so great advertisements. Is that a good example of what we're talking about?
Yes, I think this is precisely to the point, because probably all those kids who those advertisements are targeted for, they probably, perhaps some of them have lied their age. That doesn't mean that they are not kids, but because definitely, like I said, I think social media companies, if they want to, they know so much about us. They definitely also can figure out who's a minor and who's not based on the behavior. Most of adults wouldn't share their, pictures from their school friends, like during the, classes or something, whatever, like, or jumping around here and there. So it's a question of priorities, that if you actually prioritize that, if you want to really make sure that, okay, our company is very ethical and we do not want to target any inappropriate ads to kids, I don't think it's so difficult to do technically.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, yes, they do have so much information on us, and it makes me sort of, it feels kind of creepy that they would actually be digging around and trying to figure out, how old they are. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's kind of creepy. But what do you think should happen? I mean, should Facebook and some of these large, big tech corporations, social media, Google, whatever, should there be government control? Should there be more regulation?
Well, I'm aware that a lot of the listeners perhaps are in the US, and maybe there's a little bit different approach in Europe than in the US on these issues. But I think overall, many digital services, they have become like public goods or public utilities. I mean, we don't have any alternatives, and we need those to function in our society. And I always like to sort of draw examples from the human rights treaties, and they emphasize the role of governments in setting regulation and taking care of people. That's their role, and the company's power and role have grown tremendously in the last decades. If I give you an example, that the market value of the 10 biggest companies currently in the world is higher than the gross domestic product of 146 countries. So it kind of gives an idea of the power, and so that's why I also think, and I would like to quote here one of the Spider-Man movies that says, "With great power comes great responsibility."
Yeah.
So, so I think if companies themselves realize and set these as their priorities and act based on that, I don't think we need control or regulation. But if it doesn't happen, otherwise, I think it's part of government's responsibility to look after the citizens and the best interest of children.
Yeah, well, it's a good answer. I don't know. It's a very tough question because
Yeah.
we some people don't want the government to interfere with corporations, especially in the U.S. where we have capitalism and all of that.
And I think
Now,
it's also, sorry,
no, go
it's
ahead.
also, I mean, it's not that easy. It's easy to say that, but since the digital world is global, we also need a lot of global regulation. Of course, it would help if all the big markets had that in place. Most of others would follow, but then at the same time, like national level regulation is not always enough either. So that makes it very, very difficult.
We talked about age, and this is maybe something that you've already answered, but I wonder if you have anything more to say about the age of consent and whether or not that's meaningful. I mean, most places, countries, government, whatever, it's 13. But is that meaningful? That number 13?
Well, I think it's a bit hard to say a precise age for giving consent because all kids develop at different paces. So it's not that easy to say. Naturally, I understand that for legal purposes you have to put certain age, but what I think is even more meaningful than discuss like whether the age should be 13 or 14 or 15, it's more meaningful to talk about you know making the consent giving sort of like making it transparent and meaningful, the process that actually that kids, whether they are 13 or 15, they know what are they giving consent to, so that they truly understand that. I think that's even more important than the precise age.
Yeah. Um, there seems to be also a generational thing with kids today. They're, the millennials I talk to, they're brought up giving away their data. And we often hear, I don't care, it's not going to hurt me. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, that is a challenge. And I mean, it's not only for kids, I think for all of us, we all love our free services. But and we all got used to them, but then I think the challenge is that there's only this slowly growing awareness on these issues. There's been no transparency on the real price we pay. So if kids go to a store to buy a candy bar, they can assess there, the price is there. It's either €2. Yeah, okay, fine, I'm happy with that. If the price is €50 or dollars, they might be like, maybe that's a bit too high price for what I get in return. But they can't do this online because there's no way of knowing, like, okay, what is the value actually of the data that I'm giving out and how it's going to be used. And because of the age, as we all know, we've all been kids. We know that when you are at that age, perhaps you don't think about future. You don't think about what happens tomorrow, let alone what happens 5 or 10 years from now. So it's a bit difficult to make those assessments on what are the implications of my behavior today. So just because consumers or kids in this case don't know enough, and therefore they also don't realize to care, it doesn't mean that the providers of the services shouldn't care either.
Right. So we're talking a lot about the corporations. I'm skipping around a little bit here, but we talk about the corporations having responsibility. What about the parents? What is their responsibility in all of this?
I mean, naturally, in principle, parents are responsible for raising their children and keeping them safe. I mean, we all agree with that, right?
Hmm.
But in today's society, they can't do it alone in all fronts. I once saw this picture that was comparing that what was the parents' role back like 30 decades ago. It said, uh, feed them just to keep them alive. And today it's the list is just so long. So, and that's why we have, I mean, overall in our society, we have all kinds of regulation and rules in place related to children to keep them safe. Especially if there's harmful things. If I take as examples of, there are, it's not parents. I mean, naturally, parents play a role, but there's also, if kids go to the store, they can't just buy alcohol and cigarettes and everything. The store is responsible for checking the age. Also, so there's also other, you know, institutions, people in the society that are looking after the kids. And while parents can have a bigger role in younger kids' lives, if we talk about, a 3-year-old or 5-year-old, naturally, I mean, parents, can play a big role. But if we talk about the age group of, teens, like 13 to 17-year-olds, you know, it is very difficult for parents to spy on what they're doing online. And even by law, as we talked about the age of giving consent, even by law in many countries, these kids give their own consent for data processing, not their parents.
Right.
So that's why it's also like, the parents' role there, it's not that significant anymore when the kids get older.
Right. Um, so let's talk about this MyData conference. That's where we sort of, well, where I heard about you, and I know you gave this wonderful talk with IEEE, and there was a video that struck me, and I went and watched it on YouTube. You can find it. It was very powerful. There was a workshop, and then there was a panel, I guess you would call it, where the kids were asking questions of the adults, right?
Yes.
And tell us about that. I mean, what were some of the questions and what conclusions were drawn there?
Yeah. So this is a video we filmed both in Finland and in the UK. We were workshopping with kids of different ages, between, let's say, like 14 to 17 or 18. And then, like, the kids could, we wanted them to ask, as based on the workshop, we were talking about these different issues around data and data processing and selling. And then they were like, okay, what are the questions or concerns you would like to share with those people who are actually responsible for deciding these issues. So kind of our approach is always that we don't just want to talk on behalf of children. We want kids themselves to be part of the conversation and actually voice out their concerns. So some of the questions and they asked, like they asked on the video and also during the MyData session we had, where we had 4 of those kids on the video asking questions from the experts. So they were asking questions like, why do social media apps collect so much information about you? And what do these companies do with the users' data? Like, why do they, for instance, want 15-year-old kids' data? And why is it so hard to control how your data is gathered and used? And how would an under 18-year-old be able to better determine how data is gathered and used? Why the terms and conditions are so difficult to read? And is it okay not to read the terms if you trust the company that has created the app? Is it possible to act totally anonymously online? And then they also had pretty good ideas. I mean, based on the questions, that how could consumers start favoring companies that do not sell their data to third parties? How can we make this happen? Or why is there not a law that prevents companies from selling users' data to third parties? So I found these questions just amazing, because I mean, these are exactly the same questions that I'm asking.
Yeah, it is amazing to hear children today. For me, they seem so much smarter than I was.
Yes.
You know, they know too much. I think that's a problem sometimes when I think about it. But I also remember one child, one young kid, teenager probably, um, asked the question. So, I would like to care about my privacy, or I should care about those privacy things, but I'm too lazy to care.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. So what
I
I
mean,
think,
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I mean, as long as they're free, if a kid, a teenager doesn't know, and I don't know, if you don't get hit by a truck,
Hmm.
that says this is what happens when you give away your data, it's very difficult to get people to understand and to care. So I think that's also an issue. Um, what do we need to do? Those of us who know, and those of us who are involved in the industry, the tech industry, or the digital world, what what are we supposed to do to protect our children? I mean, exactly, like what things should we do?
Well, I think we should start by realizing that we all need to take responsibility. Because I've had conversations with various companies, and they often say that there's nothing they can do because they don't have kids as their users, even if they might, but they're not aware of that, or they are too small of a player, or it's parents' responsibility, or there's nothing they can do. So I think it's also like that's the first step, that hey, wait a minute, actually I think we are all responsible for this, and we need to all do our best. So it's everybody's business to look after the kids in the society. So there's well, first thing is also to like, if companies are wondering, do I actually have kids as my users or not, it's not that difficult to find out. I mean, companies do a lot of customer surveys all the time, or there's different methods of finding out. Just go and ask from kids overall in the society, are they using what are they using? It's you'll find out. So I think that's also the second step, is that okay, first realizing, okay, we all have responsibility, and secondly finding out what is the real situation, not just kind of closing our eyes from the current situation, but okay, what is it that we can do? And there's lots of, I mean, it is a bit difficult also, even for me to understand, so who are the ones who should play a role, because the value chain is so complicated. you know we have all kinds of, we have the hardware providers who make those, give those smartphones to us, or then there's the mobile operators who provide the sort of access to online. Then there's different platforms from where I download apps. There's social media, there's games, all kinds of. So is that now the situation is more so that everybody's like, okay, but it's not actually our responsibility to be somebody else, earlier or later in that sort of value chain. But I think it's just like, if we find, if this is seen as a priority in our society, maybe we can come together and find solutions together. So if it cannot be just solved by one, that there can be something that, okay, what can we all do as the industry?
Yeah, I mean, there are alternatives. There are alternative platforms.
Mm.
Idka is one.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, we'll talk about that you know there too. And I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but um you know the problem with some of these alternatives is that the investors and
Mm.
got a lot of money out of this
Mm.
surveillance capitalism. I talk about that a lot, but it makes it hard to to be able to build these alternatives that
Mm.
aren't capitalizing on people's data.
Yes.
um, and you talked about that the other day, of why not incentivize
Mm-hmm.
companies to build things that are safe, that are secure, that are private. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. No, no, I totally agree. I mean, let's all face it. I mean, the whole, there's a reason why all these services are free, and there's a reason why most of the biggest companies in the world are precisely those that provide those free services. So obviously the money is made somehow. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think it's also, definitely. I mean, I think it's good to think of alternatives and how we also incentivize those companies who are really doing a good job. I mean, there are those alternatives out there. Currently, they don't really get rewarded. They don't get promoted, and they don't get rewarded. There's not like we have in a lot of other sort of consumer products. We have all these different kinds of certification systems and stamps, that this is environmentally friendly, or this is this and that. So couldn't we like have something like that? This is something that I've had multiple conversations on with various people. They said, like, could we have something like this? I mean, you know why not? I mean, naturally this requires a lot of awareness raising, because a lot of people, this is fairly new still. I mean, lately in the last, let's say, couple of years, it's been quite a bit on the media, but overall
Hmm.
there's still a lot of people who don't really understand this, and we don't also know, so what are we supposed to do? I mean, even if I understand, I still keep using all the same services, and give out my data for free, also because I don't know what can I do. So I think we need whole sort of systems in place. I mean, we have these sort of for environmental and a lot of social things. We have these auditings in place, that we have some sort of organizations that provide recognition. So if there's something like, maybe we need to sort of, and that can also come from the industry. Maybe it needs to have some sort of neutral third parties there, because it's easier to gain the trust from consumers if it's not the company's own label that we're ethical, but if it's provided by somebody else. But of course, that somebody else can be a sort of a coalition of different types of organizations.
Yeah. So the UN for privacy, I mean, the UN for our digital world, um, why not? Why shouldn't we do something like that? Or maybe UNICEF could lead.
Well, this is something I've heard often. A lot of people have asked that from me. I don't think UNICEF, at least not alone, would be necessarily the right organization. Uh, but because I think it's also, I mean, of course, it's a fairly risky business too, to start giving stamps to different companies working in this space. And we do really need to have a lot of people representing various organizations who really understand the practices, and who can go very, like, deep into the practices. But naturally, of course, if there is a coalition of various different types of organizations come together, why couldn't UNICEF or other UN organizations be part of that? Yeah, so I think, like you said, I mean, yeah, we need to think creatively. What kinds of organizations we need in this space, and how do we build them together, and how do we give them enough mandate and resources that they have enough teeth?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, what about if privacy and safety for children were a differentiator and a value add and a selling point? And right now, if you tell an investor or somebody that you want to sell something to, well, privacy is what we're selling. It's not really it's not really there yet, but maybe we have hope for the future.
I think so. I mean, like, if we look at what has happened with climate change over the last years, I mean, now also increasingly investors are paying attention to like, that companies where they invest in, that they really want companies to reduce the energy consumption, or provide new solutions to this, or sort of, these are sort of risks also from for business operations. So I mean, I've seen there's been a lot of also big media things on the fines that certain companies have got because they've misused the uh, their users data. So I think this is definitely should be on the radar of investors and companies, as well as a big risk factor as well.
Yeah, I mean, there you could argue that those big corporations that are getting those fines, they can afford them.
Yeah,
And
it seems
if
so.
I mean, it's just like, oh, another fine. Oh, another, I mean, it just
Maybe
happens
the
every
fines are
day.
not big enough.
Maybe it should be a
Well,
percentage of the company. Like you give over 50% of your company.
yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I have to say that one very interesting thing I heard. This was part of the conversation we had at that MyData conference that you referred to earlier. One of the panelists. I want to just, I don't want to say that it's my idea. One of the panelists, he was of the opinion that, what if, like, because of course the issue is money, and we want to, get these free services, and are we ready to pay for those, or does it cost more for companies to be ethical in this regard?
Yeah.
So one of our panelists, he thought, like, what if the government could provide tax incentives, or other incentives? It could also come from the government. Of course it can come, it's partly it's the customer's willingness, but it's also the government that can play a role, and sort of nudge the society in the right direction, that, hey, look, these are important values, we are concerned about our citizens, and we provide uh, you know benefits for those companies who are ethical.
Hmm. I like that idea. I love that idea. And let's talk to some about some of the alternatives. I mean, I just want to, Idka provides a platform for organizations and companies to share and, communicate, share, and store their information without any risk of ads, trolls, people, third parties buying people's data, none of that. So let's talk about some of the alternatives that are out there. Sort of what tools do you know of that you would recommend?
um, well, the tools, I mean, if I talk more sort of what we do at UNICEF from that point of view,
Yeah, yeah, please.
that yeah, so we since we engage a lot with companies on these issues, and of course, it's our interest that, they'll consider children as part of the operations. So what we do, what our approach to this issue is that, okay, we've started creating different types of tools. We've started creating, first of all, we created a lot of discussion papers that are kind of conversation starters, that, like, lay out what's the situation today, and then also tools that we've created together with companies that, should help companies that, sort of, what are the issues, that they should consider. So for instance, there's on our website, there's a toolkit for companies on privacy and freedom of speech that has very detailed questions on what different aspects to consider, when it comes to children, as one of their customer groups. So we kind of, and we want to, I mean, if there's, if I ever hear, if we hear, like, companies saying that this is something that is really missing, and this is something that, we see that we could play a role, we're naturally more than happy to, try to provide our advice. Naturally, I mean, we do this, like I said, we do this together with companies because we want them to be something that they truly use. And, we are child rights experts, but we are not experts in the actual, like, sort of technicalities or operations of those companies. So naturally, we can come with, like, these are the issues that should be considered, but then we need to sort of co-create together, sort of, what does it actually mean in practice for different types of companies.
Yeah, I wanted to, I think that I have hope that there's a way, there are different ways to make money. We
Mm.
always talk about ad tech and how much money people have made, blah, blah, blah. But I think we're changing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think you can be profitable, and be doing tech for good. I
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
I really think it's possible. And how about you? Are you optimistic about the future?
Well, I want to be. But at least I would like to, I mean, I'd like to link this conversation to a bigger sort of ongoing trend that is taking place sort of in our societies at the moment. Because I think, because what I said earlier, that with great power comes great responsibility, I think we've also started expecting more from companies. Making profit is no longer enough. it's, of course, it's part of, the DNA of companies, but at the same times, we expect companies increasingly to consider the environmental and social footprints, and this children in the digital world is part of the social footprint of companies working in this space, and a very important part. So it's not just about making profit, but it's about how you make that profit that matters, I think, in our society today.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point, and it's a better point than mine, because I think that just saying that companies can make money different ways, it is a selling point anyway. Think about sustainability
Mm-hmm.
and cars that like banning diesel in some
Mm.
places because they're taking too much of our environment resources. Go ahead.
And yeah, I was going to say that one thing we've touched on the sort of role of consumers, touched on the role of investors, but workers in the company, that's also a very important stakeholder here, because I think I would think that most people want to work for a company that is ethical, and they feel that part of their work is doing something good, and they do know that at least I'm not harming anybody. So if you want to get the brightest minds to work for you, I think it's also part of that it's a great place to work.
Yeah. So we have a few minutes, and I wanted to give you a chance to any final thoughts. What would you like to leave the audience with today?
Wow. I think I've already said quite a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it would be great if now and in the future we can, well, first of all, what I said earlier, that we recognize that children are one third of all the internet users, and because of that, they are users of most of the same services and products than adults, and that we actually we recognize that, and we figure out together what we can do about it. So I think it all starts from understanding, and sort of you know agreeing with the situation, that okay, this is the current situation, and we need to do something about it, and we give some priority to that as well.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure we can have a longer discussion about lots of things. It's a pleasure knowing you, and good work at UNICEF. Keep up the good work, and an important discussion for sure. So if you have any questions, to the audience, if you have any questions for me or Irene, please feel free to reach out. Add a comment on our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Connect with us on Idka. It's simple and free to set up a basic account. Businesses, groups, and organizations looking for private and secure way to communicate, share, and store sensitive or confidential information, give Idka a try. If you like what you've heard today, our show is recorded and available on YouTube as a podcast. And as a podcast on UBN Go, iTunes, iHeartRadio, any podcast platform that you use. So find us there and share with your people. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again on the next Good Tech.